Professor Rex investigates 5 signs that someone is in their last year of life. Welcome to Professor Rex Investigates, the series where we discover the 5 signs that someone is in their final year of life. Before we continue, I need to be honest with you. This is not an easy conversation. It's a necessary one. And if you're here in front of the screen, willing to listen to what I have to say, it's because part of you already knows that there are questions that deserve to be asked, even if the answer carries a weight we'd rather not bear. For decades, researchers, doctors, and scientists have dedicated their lives to understanding human aging, and what they've discovered is both frightening and liberating. The human body is incredibly wise. Long before any formal diagnosis, long before any evident crisis, it begins to send messages, subtle signals, almost invisible changes, and most of us go through these signals without seeing anything at all. Today, in this investigation, we're going to talk about 5 of these signs, not to create fear, not to take away anyone's hope, but because knowing your own body and the bodies of the people you love is an act of care. It's an act of love, and it can literally be the difference between acting in time or regretting too late. I need to make it clear from the outset that none of these signs in isolation defines how much life someone has left. The human body is too complex to be reduced to a list. What we are investigating today are patterns, combinations of changes that, when they occur together, tend to indicate a significant decline in health. And anyone who identifies these patterns in themselves or a loved one should seek a healthcare professional. This is not optional. This is essential. I need you to understand something that has completely changed the way science views aging in the last 2 decades. For a long time, doctors believed that aging was a linear process, that the body deteriorated gradually and predictably, that there was a logical and orderly sequence between full health and the end of life. But long-term longitudinal studies, especially those that follow groups of elderly people over 20-30 years, have revealed something completely different. The final decline is not linear. It doesn't happen in slow motion. There are inflection points, moments when the organism seems to cross an invisible boundary. And after that point, the trajectory changes rapidly. Researchers began calling this phenomenon late-onset frailty transition. And what they discovered is that there is a window of time before this transition, often 6 to 18 months, where specific signs are already present. Signs that the body manifests, almost as if it were trying to communicate something that the mind cannot yet accept. Have you ever stopped to observe someone closely and felt that something had changed, but couldn't quite name what it was? Perhaps it was a father, a mother, an old friend of decades. You looked and thought, something is different, but you couldn't say what it was. Well, that intuition you felt may have a much more solid scientific basis than you imagine. Because our brain, trained by decades of living with people we love, is capable of picking up patterns that we are not yet able to consciously articulate. This research is about transforming that intuition into knowledge, about learning to see what has always been right in front of us. Stay with me, because the first sign is something almost everyone experiences at some point in their lives. But when it appears differently, persistently, and combined with other factors, what seems common becomes something that deserves immediate attention. The first sign we are investigating today has a scientific name that few people outside of medical circles know. Researchers call it anorexia of aging. But we're not talking about the eating disorder that many people associate with teenagers. We're talking about something different, a progressive and involuntary loss of the desire to eat that occurs at a specific stage of life, usually from the age of 75 onwards, and which can intensify dramatically when the body begins its final transition. For a long time, this phenomenon was ignored. Doctors said it was natural to lose your appetite as you age. Families thought it was fussiness, laziness, or simply a lack of interest in food. But what studies from the National Institute on Aging in the United States have revealed in recent decades has completely changed this perception. Severe loss of appetite, especially when accompanied by unintentional weight loss, is not just an isolated symptom. It is a sign that fundamental systems of the body are silently collapsing. Why does this happen? The answer lies in a combination of factors that, together, create a perfect storm. The first factor is hormonal. With advanced aging, the levels of hormones that regulate appetite, such as ghrelin, begin to behave differently. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. It sends the message to the brain that it's time to eat. When ghrelin levels drop or the brain loses sensitivity to this signal, hunger simply doesn't appear. The person doesn't feel hungry, not because they don't need nutrition, but because the communication system between the stomach and the brain is failing. The second factor is inflammation. Researchers have discovered that in advanced stages of organic decline, the body produces elevated levels of inflammatory cytokines. These molecules were originally created by the immune system to fight infections and repair damage. But when they are chronically elevated, they have a powerful appetite-suppressing effect. The body is literally using its own energy to fight something internal, and there is no fuel left for the desire to eat. The third factor is psychological. And this is what impresses me most as a researcher, because it reveals something profound about human consciousness. Studies with patients in palliative care show that many of them, even without consciously knowing they were nearing the end, develop a different relationship with food. It's not necessarily depression. It's something researchers describe as a rearrangement of internal priorities. As if the organism knew, at some level beyond rational understanding, that the energy needed to digest and process food is being directed to other functions. I'm going to tell you about Margaret, an 82-year-old woman who lived in a small town in rural Virginia. Her daughter, Sarah, told me this story a few years ago, and it stuck with me. Margaret was always known by her family as the woman who never lost her appetite. She cooked for everyone. She loved trying new recipes. She ate with visible pleasure at every meal. Sunday was a sacred day in her house. A big table, everyone present, and Margaret in the kitchen from 6 in the morning. So, around January of a certain year, Sarah began to notice that her mother was leaving food on her plate. Not much, just a little, a spoonful of rice, half a piece of chicken, something that could easily be dismissed as a passing lack of hunger. But in the following weeks, the portion left over grew. And by March, Margaret barely touched the food. She said she didn't feel like it, that the food tasted bad, that she would eat later, but later never came. Sarah called the doctor. The tests showed that Margaret's body was declining on several fronts at the same time. In September of that same year, Margaret passed away. Sarah told me, "If I had known in that January what I know today, I would have used those months completely differently. I would have spent more time with her. I would have said more things that needed to be said. I would have listened to the stories she had been trying to tell for years and that I always postponed for another day. This is what this knowledge can do. Not reverse the inevitable, but transform the time that exists into something more conscious, more present, more full of love." Have you ever noticed this in someone in your family? A change in appetite that seemed small, but in retrospect was the beginning of something bigger? But there's something even more surprising about loss of appetite in old age. something that rarely appears in popular publications, that rarely appears on television programs, and that, when you discover it, will make you see each meal you share with someone you love in a different light. Studies show that loss of appetite in advanced aging often begins with a loss of pleasure in food before the loss of hunger itself. First, food ceases to provide pleasure. Then hunger diminishes. And this interval, this space between the end of pleasure and the end of hunger, can last for months. And it is in this interval that there is a window for intervention, a chance to investigate what is happening, an opportunity that, if ignored, can close without warning. Stay with me because the next sign often goes unnoticed by almost everyone. And when it appears combined with the loss of appetite we just discussed, the resulting picture deserves immediate attention from a healthcare professional. The second sign we're investigating today is more subtle than the first, harder to detect, and therefore more dangerous, because when people finally notice it, it's often too late to act. Neuroscientists call it accelerated cognitive decline. But I'm not talking about diagnosed dementia. I'm not talking about established Alzheimer's. I'm talking about something that happens before that. A change in the pattern of thought, memory, and information processing that is different from the normal forgetfulness we all experience with age. How do you distinguish normal age-related forgetfulness from a real warning sign? That's the question neurologists hear most often in their offices. And the answer they give today is very different from what they gave 20 years ago. Normal forgetfulness is episodic and specific. You forget where you left your keys. You forget the name of an actor from a movie you saw years ago. You forget what you went to get in the kitchen. But when you are reminded, when someone tells you the actor's name, when you go back to the room and see the object you were looking for, the memory returns. Context restores the information. This is normal aging. Accelerated cognitive decline works differently. And there are 3 characteristics that researchers have identified as specific markers. The first is temporal confusion. Not occasional, not due to a moment of distraction, but persistent and progressive. The person begins to have difficulty placing events in time. Things that happened 20 years ago seem to have happened last week. Recent events seem distant. The timeline of life begins to become scrambled in ways that go beyond simple memory lapses. The second characteristic is the change in personality and social judgment. And this is what scares families the most when they look back, because it happens gradually. The person who was reserved starts making inappropriate comments in public. The person who was careful with money starts making impulsive purchases. The person who was socially skilled starts not realizing that they are interrupting conversations, that they are repeating stories for the 3rd time in an hour, that they are causing discomfort to others without realizing it. It's not malice. It's the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for social control and judgment, starting to fail faster than expected. The third characteristic is what researchers call islands of lucidity. And this is the most emotionally complex aspect of the whole process. A person experiencing accelerated cognitive decline frequently has moments of absolute clarity interspersed with periods of confusion. And these moments of clarity can be so convincing, so complete, that families become convinced that everything was fine or that they were exaggerating their concern. But islands of lucidity are, in fact, part of the pattern of decline, not the exception to it. I want you to think of someone you know, someone over 75 years old, someone you interact with regularly. Have you noticed any of these three characteristics? Time confusion, subtle personality changes, islands of lucidity interspersed with moments of confusion? So don't ignore it. Don't attribute it to tiredness. stress, or homesickness. Talk to a doctor. What the researchers discovered after that completely changed how many doctors view aging, because they realized something they had never documented before with such precision. In many cases, people experiencing accelerated cognitive decline have heightened self-awareness of their own difficulties in the early stages. They know they are forgetting things. They feel that something has changed, and they often remain silent about it for fear of worrying their family, for fear of losing their autonomy, for fear of what this recognition might mean for their lives as they know them. This brings us to a crucial point in this investigation. Sometimes the person who needs help the most is the one who least wants to ask. And the question I want to leave you with right now is this: do the people you love know they can tell you when they are afraid? Do they know they can tell you when they notice something is different? This conversation, however difficult it may be, could be the most important thing you do this week. There's a detail that completely changes this investigation, and one that few researchers openly discuss. Studies show that when accelerated cognitive decline and loss of appetite occur together, the risk of significant deterioration in the next 12 months increases substantially. This is no coincidence. These two systems, the digestive and the neurological, share common inflammatory mechanisms. And when both begin to fail simultaneously, it's a sign that the process isn't localized to a single organ or system. It's systemic. Stay with me, because what comes next may explain something you've never been able to understand. The third sign is about to reveal a dimension of aging that most people have never considered. And when you understand the mechanism behind it, you will see the human body in a completely new way. The third sign is what geriatric medicine specialists call end-stage fatigue syndrome. And I need to be very precise here, because there is an important distinction that separates normal age-related fatigue from what we are investigating now. Everyone gets more tired with age. This is biological, expected, and perfectly normal. Muscles progressively lose muscle mass. The heart works less efficiently than it did at age 40. Sleep becomes less restorative. This type of tiredness is part of aging and is not, in itself, a cause for alarm. What we are investigating is different. It's a tiredness that doesn't respond to rest. It's an exhaustion that is present first thing in the morning, even before the person has made any effort. It's a fatigue that goes beyond the physical and penetrates the emotional and cognitive dimensions. The person doesn't have the energy to talk. They don't have the energy to be interested in things that used to excite them. They don't even have the energy to move from one room to another without an effort that seems disproportionate, almost heroic. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University have identified that this specific pattern of fatigue is associated with a cellular phenomenon called accelerated mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria are the energy factories of every cell in the body. They convert the nutrients we ingest into ATP, the energy currency that fuels all vital processes, from the heartbeat to the most complex thought. With normal aging, mitochondrial efficiency gradually declines. But in people transitioning to late-onset frailty, this decline is dramatic and accelerated. The result is that the body's cells simply cannot produce enough energy to sustain basic functions with the same vitality as before. Few people know this detail. Muscle cells are the first to visibly suffer this impact. That's why end-stage fatigue syndrome often manifests first in hand strength. Doctors have a simple test for this called the hand grip strength test. And studies show that a significant drop in hand grip strength, especially when combined with other signs we are investigating today, is a surprisingly accurate predictor of declining health in the following months. A study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society followed more than 2,000 adults over 70 years of age and found that those with significantly reduced grip strength were 4 times more likely to develop severe functional disability in the following 18 months. Have you noticed that someone in your family has started having difficulty opening jars? Holding a pen for an extended period? Shaking someone's hand with the same firmness as before? This could be more than arthritis. It could be more than simple muscle weakness. It could be a reflection of something happening at a cellular level throughout the body. Let me tell you about Edward, a 78-year-old man who spent his entire life working as a carpenter in the state of Oregon. Hands as strong as stone, upright posture, energy that put people 30 years younger to shame. When he entered a room, people noticed. He had a physical presence that no words can fully describe. His wife, Dorothy, told me that the first thing she noticed was at Christmas. Edward couldn't squeeze the bottle opener to open the wine for dinner. He laughed. He said his hands were cold, and everyone laughed along. Nobody thought anything of it but a funny moment, because Edward had never shown any sign of weakness before. But Dorothy paid attention. In the following weeks, she observed, and she noticed that Edward was avoiding situations that required manual effort. He was neglecting small repairs around the house that he had previously done with pleasure and ease. He was sitting more, going out less, and along with that, there was a new quietness in him, a kind of inner withdrawal that she couldn't name but recognized as different. Dorothy insisted that Edward see a doctor in February. The tests revealed a cascade of problems neither of them suspected. In October, Edward died, but Dorothy told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Those 9 months I had after I realized were the best of our lives, because we stopped putting things off. We stopped saying, we'll do that later. We did everything in those 9 months, everything we had saved for years. This is the gift that this knowledge can offer, not the absence of loss, but the possibility of filling the time that exists with what truly matters." But there is something even more surprising about terminal fatigue that researchers have recently discovered. A study from the University of Cambridge revealed that there is a very specific form of fatigue that doesn't involve muscle tiredness, but rather a weariness of the will to engage with the world. Scientists call it advanced motivational apathy, and it is different from clinical depression, although it can be confused with it. A person with advanced motivational apathy is not sad. They are not distressed. They are simply disengaged, as if the internal engine that once propelled them through life is now running at a very slow pace. The distinction matters because the treatment is different, and because recognizing that this apathy is a physical sign, not a weakness of character, not a lack of gratitude, can completely change how the family relates to the person going through it. Wait until you discover the final sign, because the 5th sign in this investigation will reveal something that researchers have only recently begun to understand, and that completely changes how you will think about the last months of anyone's life. But before that, we need to talk about the 4th sign, and it involves something that most people would never associate with the decline of aging. The 4th sign from this investigation is what experts call altered sleep patterns in later stages. And what makes this sign particularly fascinating from a scientific point of view is that it's not just a symptom of aging. Researchers have discovered that it is, in part, the very mechanism that accelerates decline. There is a profound relationship between sleep and longevity that has taken decades to fully understand. Sleep is not a passive state of rest. It is an active and extraordinarily complex process during which the brain performs functions that are literally impossible to perform when we are awake. One of these functions is metabolic cleansing. The glymphatic system, discovered in detail only in 2013 by researchers at the University of Rochester, is a network of channels around the brain's blood vessels that functions almost exclusively during deep sleep. During this process, cerebrospinal fluid flows through the glymphatic channels and removes metabolic waste from the brain, including proteins that, when accumulated, are associated with Alzheimer's and other forms of cognitive decline. In other words, deep sleep is literally the process by which the brain cleans itself. It's the nightly cleaning that keeps the most sophisticated organ in the universe functioning. Now, what happens when this process fails? When deep sleep diminishes or disappears, as often happens in advanced aging, metabolic waste accumulates. The brain's cleaning system can't cope with the volume of waste produced by neuronal metabolism. And over time, this accumulation creates an environment that accelerates cognitive decline, increases systemic inflammation, compromises the immune system, and reduces the body's ability to repair itself. It's a vicious cycle. Decline impairs sleep. Impaired sleep accelerates decline. But the sleep disturbance we are investigating goes beyond the simple insomnia that many people experience throughout their lives. The specific pattern that researchers have identified as associated with accelerated decline is composed of three distinct elements that, when they appear together, form a very specific picture. The first is extreme sleep fragmentation. The person sleeps for many hours but wakes up dozens of times a night, often without even realizing they've woken up. Sleep becomes a superficial and continuous state, lacking the restorative deep phases responsible for physical recovery and memory consolidation. The second is the inversion of the circadian cycle, the natural biological rhythm that keeps us awake during the day and asleep at night begins to become severely deregulated. The person starts to nap intermittently during the day and stay awake for extended periods during the night. Not by choice, but because the internal biological clock is losing accuracy. And when the clock loses accuracy, all the other systems that depend on this rhythm begin to function out of sync. The third element is the most surprising of all. Researchers have documented that many people in advanced stages of decline experience a period of excessive sleep followed, weeks or months later, by a period of severe insomnia. This oscillation between extremes, sleeping too much and then sleeping almost not at all, is a specific marker that appears with remarkable frequency in the histories of people who died in the following months. Has this ever happened to someone you love? A dramatic change in sleep patterns that seemed to come out of nowhere and didn't respond to any medication or intervention. This pattern deserves attention, not as a sentence, but as information, as data that needs to be brought to the attention of a healthcare professional urgently. What the researchers discovered after that completely changed how many doctors view aging, because they realized that changes in sleep are not just consequences of decline. In many cases, they are also causes that accelerate that same decline. And breaking this cycle, even partially, even with simple interventions such as adjusting schedules, exposure to natural light, and consistent routines, can have a significant impact on quality of life in the remaining months. This means that identifying sleep disturbances is not just an exercise in recognition. It's an opportunity to act, to talk to a doctor about interventions that can improve sleep quality, to create environmental conditions that promote rest, to understand that caring for an elderly person's sleep is not just a luxury. It's a fundamental care that can make the difference between months of suffering and months of dignity. Let me tell you about Helen, an 81-year-old woman from Nashville, Tennessee. Her daughter, Patricia, worked full-time and could only visit her mother on weekends. For months, Patricia noticed that her mother was sleepy during Saturday visits, falling asleep on the sofa during conversations, dozing off right after lunch. Patricia thought it was a sign that her mother was resting well, enjoying her retirement. But then, on a surprise visit on a Monday afternoon, she found Helen awake, agitated, completely disoriented about what day and time it was. Helen had been awake all night, suffering from severe insomnia. Her sleep pattern had changed dramatically, but since the visits were on weekends, Patricia had only seen half the story. This is what happens with many families. We see fragments, pieces of the picture, and from these fragments we conclude that everything is fine, or that the situation is better than it actually is. The fifth sign often surprises even experienced professionals. And I'll tell you why. Not because it's biologically complex, but because it lives in the space between medicine and philosophy, between science and the human soul. And when you understand what it is, you'll look at the people you love in a way that will never change. Researchers call it progressive vital disengagement, but I prefer to describe it the way patients themselves describe it when they have enough clarity to talk about it. It's the feeling that the future has begun to shrink. Not dramatically, not in a moment of crisis, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, like the tide receding so slowly that you only notice the change when you look at a rock that was covered in water and is now dry. How does this manifest itself in everyday practice? The person stops making future plans, not out of outright pessimism, not because of diagnosed depression, but because of a kind of growing orientation towards the present and the past that intensifies over time. Invitations to events the following month generate mild resistance. Travel plans that once excited the person are now met with an indifference that confuses the family. She begins to talk much more about the past. Childhood stories that were never told suddenly appear. Memories of people who died decades ago are evoked with surprising clarity, as if those absent faces were somehow more present. There is a kind of life review that happens almost automatically, as if the person were making an internal inventory of what they have lived through. She begins to distribute objects, not necessarily because she is ill or because she went to the doctor and received bad news, but because she feels, in some way that she herself may not be able to fully articulate, that certain things need to go to certain people while she can still consciously do so. This behavior, which psychologists call anticipatory bequest, is documented in palliative care studies as one of the most consistent behavioral markers of the last months of life. And there is a third behavior that is both the most beautiful and the most devastating to observe. The person begins to say goodbye in ways that aren't direct farewells. They call people they've been distant from for years, for decades. They make peace with old conflicts that everyone thought would never be resolved. They say things they've never said. They ask about people they haven't seen in a long time. They create opportunities for moments of connection that they previously let pass without thinking. It's as if a part of them knew, even if consciously they couldn't or didn't want to accept it, that the time for these conversations was running out. Palliative care researchers who have studied this phenomenon describe something that deeply impacted me when I first read about it. In many cases, people in progressive life disengagement demonstrate an emotional wisdom that impresses the caregivers around them, as if the process of approaching death creates a clarity about what truly matters, a kind of distillation of human essence, which is difficult to achieve at any other time in life. There are accounts from families describing the last months of a loved one's life as the period of greatest emotional depth and genuine connection in the entire relationship. Have you ever been around someone in that state? Someone who seemed to have reached a place of peace that you couldn't fully understand? This peace, when accompanied by the other signs we've investigated today, may be progressive vital disengagement manifesting in its most serene form. Let me tell you about Thomas. an 86-year-old man who lived his whole life in a small town in Vermont. His son, Michael, told me that his father was always a man of few words, hardworking, reserved, someone who expressed love through actions, presence, reliability, but not words. Never words. Then, one summer, Michael began to notice that his father was calling more often. Not for practical matters, not to ask about the car or to discuss the electricity bill. To talk, to ask questions about the children's lives, about what the grandchildren were doing, about dreams Michael had as a child, about things Thomas had never asked in decades. One afternoon, Thomas invited Michael for a drive through the places where he had spent his childhood. It was 3 hours of silence interspersed with stories. Fields Thomas had run across as a boy, the school where he had met the woman who would become his wife, the farm where his grandfather had taught him the names of the constellations. Michael had never heard half of those stories. He didn't even know they existed. Late in the afternoon, back home, in the car parked in the driveway, Thomas looked at his son and simply said, "You know I love you, right?" Michael told me he was so surprised he couldn't respond immediately, because his father had never said that before. Never. In 86 years of life, that phrase had never come from those lips. And he said that moment would stay with him forever, more vivid than any photograph, more real than any memory he possessed. Thomas died 4 months later. Progressive vital disengagement is not a sentence. It is a summons to be present, to hear the stories that have not yet been told, to say the things that have not yet been said, to receive the love that is being offered, perhaps for the last time, in ways that may seem unusual, unexpected, but which are profoundly real and completely sincere. Is someone in your life going through this right now? Is there someone you love who is trying to connect with you in a different way than usual? Who is giving away objects, revisiting memories, making peace with the past, calling more than usual? If so, please don't let this moment pass. Answer that call. Accept that invitation for coffee. Listen to this story for the third time as if it were the first, because it might be the last. And now, before we conclude this investigation, I want to tie the 5 signs together in an image that I hope will stay with you forever. The first sign, loss of appetite, is the body saying it needs less external fuel because it's redirecting resources to more urgent functions. It's the organism being economical in a way that consciousness hasn't yet fully recognized. The second sign, accelerated cognitive decline, is the brain reorganizing its priorities, letting go of what is no longer essential, intensifying what still truly matters, sometimes revealing surprising emotional clarity just when cognitive clarity seems to be diminishing. The third sign, terminal fatigue, is vital energy being concentrated, less dispersed throughout social life, projects, and commitments, more focused on the functions that the organism considers essential to continue existing. The fourth sign, altered sleep patterns, is the central nervous system shifting mode. It becomes less future-oriented and focused on planning, and more present-oriented and focused on processing accumulated experience. The fifth sign, progressive vital disengagement, is human consciousness preparing for something that no scientific language can fully describe. It is the most mysterious and profound dimension of everything we investigate today. Together, these 5 signs are not a diagnosis. They are a conversation the body is having with itself, a conversation the organism is having with time. And when you learn to listen to this conversation, when you learn to recognize these patterns in yourself or in someone you love, you gain something that no money in the world can buy. You gain conscious time, You gain the possibility of transforming what could be just loss into something much more complex and beautiful, into presence, into connection, into love that finally speaks its own name. I want you to come away from this investigation with one certainty, not the certainty that you know when someone is going to die. Nobody knows that. Nobody ever has, and nobody ever will. But the certainty that paying attention to your own body and to the bodies of the people you love is always an act of care. It is always an act of love. And it can be, in some cases, the most important act you do. If someone you know exhibits one or more of these signs persistently and increasingly, please encourage them to visit a doctor. Not out of fear, but because knowledge is care, because information is affection, and because healthcare professionals have tools and resources that can make a real difference in quality of life, no matter how long it has existed. Knowing your own body is one of the most profound ways to respect the life you have been given. And knowing the bodies of the people we love is one of the most profound ways to honor the love we share with them. The time that exists is always enough for the love that can still be given, as long as we don't let it pass by unnoticed. If this research helped you in any way, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who deserves to live with more knowledge and peace of mind. This was another investigation by Professor Rex. Remember, your body is always talking. The question is, are you listening?